Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something quite radical in architecture. An idea that challenges a lot of current thinking, this push towards spectacle, and it demands, well, a kind of philosophical reset.
Hmm.
We're diving deep into the material around TDA, that's Miguel Duarte's firm, and well, it sounds simple, but it's incredibly complex claim. Everything is structure.
Yeah. Deceptively simple.
Exactly. And the sources we've looked at, they're pretty critical of where contemporary design is. They talk about architecture being on a confusing path,
Yeah.
always looking outside itself for meaning.
Chasing validation, yeah. Seeking significance in these spectacular forms or crafting stories that frankly sound good but don't say much about the actual building.
Right. Stories that say little.
And that's the jump-off point for TDA. They're saying, look, let's turn inward. Let's go back to the origin structure. So for you listening, our mission today is to really grasp why they see structure not just as, beams and columns.
Not just the technical stuff.
Exactly. Not just technical, but as an ethical position, a philosophical grounding for how we live and how we build. It's like they're suggesting if you define your structure with honesty, you're defining your whole way of interacting with the world.
That's the core thesis, isn't it? That structure isn't just holding the building up, doing the grunt work.
No, it creates it. That's the radical bit. They call structure the invisible order that gives shape to matter.
Okay, invisible order. Let's unpack that. What does that mean in practice?
Well, if it's the invisible order, TDA's whole approach is about making it visible, demanding it's exposed, really. They argue that right there in the visibility, the material, the forces, the sheer weight of it all, there's an inherent honesty, even a poetic quality maybe, that we shouldn't be covering up with drywall or fancy facades. It's basically refusing to disguise the fundamental truth of how that building stands up.
That sounds compelling, aesthetically even. But couldn't that just be a style choice? I mean, we've seen plenty of exposed concrete buildings that feel, well, dishonest in other ways. Why is this an ethical thing for TDA?
Because of their fundamental ethical belief. In architecture, there is no innocence.
Yeah.
That's a powerful line.
No innocence. Wow.
Yeah. Every line you draw, every beam you spec out, it has real consequences in the world. So if you accept structure as your starting point, your main principle, you are instantly forced to deal with reality.
Meaning?
Meaning resources, the local context, the actual economy of means, how much stuff are you using, how much time, how much carbon. Hiding the structure, well, that lets you kind of ignore the real cost of those choices.
That's a strong link. Structural honesty tied directly to resource responsibility. Which brings up another huge point the sources hit on TDA's rejection of how the industry usually splits things up.
Oh, absolutely. They just toss out that arbitrary separation between engineering and architecture, between calculation and design.
Yeah.
Conventionally, right, the architect dreams up a shed.
Right, sketches something beautiful.
Exactly. And then the engineer has to figure out how to make this thing stand up, often leading to really expensive, structurally awkward compromises.
So the engineer ends up kind of wrestling with the structure just to make the pretty picture happen.
Precisely. And that wrestling match,
Yes.
it adds cost, material waste, and often you end up with a building that feels, visually split, like a nice skin stretched over a clumsy, overly complicated skeleton.
Yeah, I can picture that.
TDA insists that thinking about structure is the act of designing the whole project. Space, form they have, to grow out of the structural logic. It can't be the other way around. They're not interested in just, dressing skeletons with beautiful skins.
No cosmetic approach.
No. They want the skeleton itself to be elegant, efficient, honest, beautiful in its own right.
That demands a lot from the very first concept, doesn't it? You need a deep grasp of the forces involved before you even think about where the walls or windows go.
It really does.
So to understand how they actually developed this really integrated method, we need to look at their context. Paraguay. The sources really stress this. Why is Paraguay so important here?
It seems crucial because it's described as this unique place where thinking and doing aren't divorced, where reflection and action coexist naturally.
Unlike other places where theory is in the university and practice is on the messy building site.
And they rarely intersect meaningfully. In Paraguay, TDA clearly benefited from pioneers like Solano Benitez and Javier Corvalán. They fostered this environment where making things is a form of thinking. And this allowed TDA to develop their own specific circular method.
Okay, tell us about that circular method. How does that loop actually work?
Well, they outline 3 parts that feed each other constantly. There's the project, which is the design work in the studio, then construction, and this is key on-site testing, experimenting with materials, and actually allowing for mistakes and analyzing them.
Learning from errors, not just avoiding them.
Exactly. And the third part is academia, taking those learnings back to the university for reflection, for discussion, for developing theory.
That's quite elegant because it keeps the theory firmly planted on the ground, right?
Yeah.
It's not abstract speculation. It's theory born from concrete reality, from the lived experience of building.
It ensures the academic side is always relevant to actual problems. And that's how they keep, as the sources put it, their capacity for wonder alive. They're not using this cycle just to prove their old ideas right.
Right, not just validation.
No, the goal is to keep asking fundamental questions. Not just the technical, how do we build this,
Yeah.
but the much deeper, why are we building this in the first place? They put students right into real situations where there's no easy answer in a textbook.
Forcing genuine invention, rooted in the materials themselves, maybe free from some of the market pressures that often kill experimentation.
That seems to be the idea. Keep the questions alive. And that openness brings us back to this larger idea structure as something universal, something that goes beyond the building site into, well, almost a philosophical metaphor. This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah, the sources say TDA argues structure runs through everything, from a leaf of a tree to the formation of a galaxy. How do they connect that huge idea back to their work?
What's fascinating is how they ground this universal concept locally. In Paraguay, they draw on Guarani wisdom. Specifically, they point to the Guarani word for tree, which is vivara.
Okay, vivara.
And vivara, it literally translates to water that will become earth.
Wait, say that again? Water that will become earth. It's describing a process, not a thing.
Exactly. The word itself names a transformation, a flow. It's not labeling a static object like we might think of tree. It's naming the entire process, the drawing up of water, the growing, the aging, eventually returning to the earth.
Wow. That's a fundamentally different way to see the world. How on earth do you apply that kind of thinking to something like architecture, which we usually think of as the most permanent, static thing around?
Well, TDA tries to view the building through that same dynamic lens. They talk about architecture as being alive, breathing, adapting, mutating, aging.
Alive, a building.
In a sense, yes. This cyclical view directly challenges that contemporary obsession with permanence, right? With immutability, with this idea of frozen perfection. The building that looks brand new forever.
Which never actually happens, does it?
Of course not. So for TDA, things like patinas, the marks of use, signs of repair or adaptation, these aren't flaws to be erased. They're layers of meaning being added over time. They're part of the building's honest life story.
So the aim isn't instant perfection, but maybe long-term graceful honesty, which leads us straight to their big concept, structural dignity. What is that?
Structural dignity, it's like the ultimate expression of that economy of means we talked about. It demands that every single element responds gracefully, precisely to what it needs to do, and nothing more, without ornament, without excess.
An ethics of precision.
That's a good way to put it, an ethics of precision, where every single piece of the structure has to justify its existence.
Okay, but how does someone, listening to this, tell the difference between a building that has this structural dignity and one that's just, say, following a minimalist aesthetic trend?
Yeah.
White walls, simple shapes.
That's the critical distinction. Minimalism is often an aesthetic choice. You pick it because it looks clean, modern, maybe fashionable. Structural dignity is presented as an ethical outcome.
Okay.
The building is simple, not because simple is in style, but because everything unnecessary has been rigorously stripped away. But, and this is key, only after a really profound, complex thought process determines what is truly necessary.
So a minimalist building might hide a complicated structure behind a clean facade.
Exactly. Whereas a building with structural dignity, it exposes its simplest, most efficient structural solution precisely because that efficiency, that intelligence, is seen as beautiful in itself.
Right. The beauty isn't applied. It emerges from the honesty and the efficiency. It's like intelligence made visible.
You nailed it. That's exactly what Paulo Mendes de Rocha meant when he famously said, "Structure is the built poem." Beauty arises when the useful and the beautiful are one and the same, rooted completely in that structural honesty, that direct conversation with gravity.
Let's make this concrete. How does this philosophy actually look in bricks and mortar or stone and concrete? The sources call TDA's buildings constructed manifestos.
They really are. I mean, take the Dolman House. The structure there is described as, like, archaic, an essential gesture. It's literally 9 enormous local scones holding up a single heavy concrete slab.
Like Stonehenge, almost.
Exactly. They're using that ancient megalithic principle, the most basic post and lintel structure you can imagine, not as some historical reference, but as a timeless principle of support.
The structure is the architecture, a primal statement about ground and gravity.
Totally. Or look at the Fadona restrooms. Instead of specifying, fancy imported modern materials, they used rammed earth, one of the oldest building techniques there is.
Rammed earth, okay.
And the analysis in the sources shows that this rammed earth actually performed better, technically and thermally, than expensive industrialized systems they could have chosen. It's a case study in how thoughtful engagement with tradition could actually outperform forced, often unnecessary innovation.
That's the economy of means right there. Doing more with local earth, local knowledge, local labor, instead of maybe less effectively with the imported high-energy stuff.
And it scales up too. It's not just small houses. Think about the BNF, the National Development Bank building. That's called a civic gesture.
Okay.
Structurally, they designed this sequence of volumes specifically to lift the main bulk of the building up and set it back from the street.
So the structural move, lifting the building, is what actually creates the public space below.
It creates this generous covered urban plaza right at the ground level. So the technique, the structure, directly serves the public realm, not just the private needs of the bank. It reclaims space for the city. It renames, as the source says, the whole relationship between that big institution and the people on the street.
That's powerful. Now, you mentioned earlier their method involves embracing mistakes, testing on site. The sources talk about an error in the house in the air project. That sounds risky for a client project. How did a real design mistake play out?
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but it was apparently a critical learning point. During construction, some kind of design error happened, maybe a miscalculation, or the material behaved unexpectedly. But instead of trying to hide it or force it back to the original plan,
Which would be the typical reaction, probably.
Instead, they stopped, analyzed it, and found that the error itself actually revealed unexpected possibilities, things they hadn't even considered in the initial, more rigid studio design.
So they listened to the material, basically, instead of just imposing the drawing onto it.
That's the essence of it. The big lesson was that real design maturity doesn't come from having absolute control. It comes from being able to respond intelligently when the material itself, or the process, suggests a different path. Sticking too rigidly to the plan can actually blind you. So TDA's whole mandate becomes eliminate everything until only the necessary is left. But getting to that final, often profound simplicity takes immense intellectual work. And as the sources emphasize, it takes courage to remove things that work but aren't indispensable.
That courage must be the hardest part sometimes. Taking away something that's perfectly functional but not truly essential, it requires such a demanding level of clarity.
It really does. And that's what makes this approach feel so relevant right now.
So let's bring it all together. This whole deep dive into TDA's philosophy, this demanding commitment to structure as an ethical way of working. What does it really mean for you listening to this, maybe outside of architecture?
Well, when TDA says everything is structure, I think they mean it as a way of being in the world. A call for inhabiting, for building whatever it is you build with total awareness. Architecture is just the most visible example. It becomes a kind of collective self-portrait. If we build superficially, chasing trends, looking for easy fixes, spectacular surfaces that reveal something about our collective priorities, our superficiality, maybe. But if we commit to honesty, to efficiency, to real material integrity in how we build, that reveals a different kind of collective awareness.
So coming back to structure, it grounds our imagination, forces it into contact with concrete reality. The sources are pretty blunt about the urgency here. They say, given the crises we face, political, social, economic, ecological, architecture, sustained from structure, is no longer an option, it's an urgency.
It's presented as the most direct path towards a practice that's responsible, truly contemporary, and respects the very real limits of our planet.
A path toward responsibility.
And maybe, since everything that resists, everything that holds its shape, whether it's an idea in your team, a stone foundation for your house, a long-term goal you have, is essentially thought made into matter. Here's something to think about.
What's the fundamental structural element in your own life? Maybe your work, your organization. It could be conceptual, it could be physical. Is there something essential you're currently hiding? Maybe behind a spectacular facade of busyness or complexity. Or just overlooking, because the honest answer is harder. What kind of ethical shift might happen if you decided to expose that core truth and build only on what's truly essential?